acknowledging charitable contributions. We've got a great write-up in the nonprofit guide on pages 155 and 68. But bring us up to date on gift acknowledgement.
Right. Well, probably two things that you want to acknowledge up front. First of all, if someone is giving their time, you certainly want to thank them and encourage them to continue doing that, but that's not something that you can give them a charitable contribution receipt for. That is not deductible, nor is the gift of rent-free use of property. So if someone is housing a missionary in their home, generally, or maybe donating part of their office building to a church for its use, that is not something that is eligible for the charitable contribution deduction. So you want to make sure that you don't issue a receipt for those items. Some of the payments to a church are not gifts and do not qualify for the gift receipt. Well, what are we talking here? If you have a ticket sale, or church banquet or a concert, generally speaking, when you have goods or services that are exchanged, there might be a number of items, sales of tapes or church service, even if it says it's for a suggested donation amount of $10. Tuition payments for a student in a church-related school, or payments that are intended to benefit a specific individual, as we've talked about, are not charitable contributions. Now, I'll give a small caveat on the concert or tape sales. You may get into an area of quid pro quo, Latin term, quid pro quo. We talk about it in the book, disclosures. So generally speaking, if that says that your charitable contribution deduction is not deductible to the extent of goods or services that you've received. So if you receive a CD that is worth $10 and you pay $20, you can't deduct the $10 that you paid for the CD. You could only deduct the $10 that you received, or that was in excess of the fair market value of that CD. Maybe a better example might be the concert. So say the average fair market value of a concert of a popular Christian band is $25, and you're able to get in. It's a special church concert for $75. Well, you might look at the fair market value of that being $25 and just say, there's $50 added on there. You really get into the weeds a little bit with the quid pro quo, and we'll stay at a higher level with this. But if you have some questions about that, I'd refer to the guide as you walk through that. What are some of the things that should not be included evaluation of a gift? Well, gifts of property, basically non-cash gifts. The IRS does not want you as a church to get into the business of valuing non-cash gifts for deduction purposes. That is the sole responsibility of the donor. And that would include a gift of stock. You might tell them on the day that it was given, the high and the low was X. And the reason being is that there might be items, like for example with the stock, there'd be different treatment for long-term and short-term. You as a church would have no idea whether it was a long-term stock or a short-term stock. And so you have to be very careful that you don't place a value on that, because you could be putting yourself in a position of stating a value that you really don't have a sense of understanding what that value is, or how much is actually deductible to that person. And then gifts of out-of-pocket expenses. So if you have someone who, let's say they've gone on a missions trip and they've paid for it all themselves, you want to go through and carefully thank them for your ticket to Haiti, your lodging, your related expenses, and be specific as you can on that. but then inform them according to IRS rules and regulations. We cannot place a value on this, and that is something that you need to address with your tax preparer. And so those are some items that should not include evaluation of the gift. Are there special rules for the gifts of property? Well, probably one of the most widely known now are gifts of autos, boats, and airplanes. Now, I don't imagine too many of your churches are getting gifts of boats or airplanes, especially this time of the year. But they're lumped in with autos. There may be some historical sense. You may get an occasional auto given for a pastor, but thanks to the Pension Protection Act of 2006, the rules surrounding autos have gotten extensively more complex. And so if you're not going to keep the auto, there's some special rules. If you're going to keep the auto, you need to follow those rules. We've broken that out. But generally speaking, you need to know about two forms, the 8283 for property valued at over $500, and you'll need an appraisal signature of a representative of the church required if over $5,000. The form 8282, if the appraisal was required, this form must be filed if the property is disposed of within 3 years. And then you have to file that, I believe, within 120 days. And so you just need to know if you're going to receive an automobile as a contribution, realize that there's special rules that apply. And you may want to do some due diligence to see if this auto is worth the effort of going through this process. If it's got 3 wheels and it's on its last legs, it may not be worth the process. You might encourage somebody, if it's something you're just going to sell anyway, you might encourage them to go ahead and sell it and then give the church the money instead. That might be a lot easier for everyone involved. Generally speaking, some gifts qualify for a standard gift receipt. We're talking about cash and checks. Credit cards would fall in there if you're using a merchant account. So what should you have on a receipt? Well, the first is the donor's name. And you want to use the name that the gift was given in. So if you received a check from Bob and Jan Smith, you want to issue the donor receipt to Bob and Jan Smith.
What about Bob and Jan have a corporation, and so you get a check that says Bob and Jan's Corporation, and they say, would you just issue that receipt out to us personally?
Right, and that question comes up pretty frequently. And so, well, I guess that makes sense, right? Well, no, because you potentially could be involved in some kind of a tax evasion process by doing so. They might be trying to avoid receiving that as income and having to pay the tax on that by just having that funneled. But then they get additional benefit as individuals in writing that off. And so you really need to be careful in looking at who is that contribution from. So if it's from, someone's corporation or business, the receipt needs to be issued to that corporation or business, not to the individual that's behind that. Because you do not know the ins and outs of that situation. Even if you think you might, there could be things that are beyond that that you want to be careful about. So just something to be on the lookout for. The amount. You want to have the amount on there and clearly state that. You also want to state that no goods or values or no goods or services were received. That's something that basically, if you've got goods or services, we get back into the quid pro quo situation, and you've got to work through that process. But generally speaking, average church receipt's not going to have any goods or services involved.
So how important is just that one statement, no goods or services?
Well, if you don't include that statement, that's probably the statement that an IRS agent would look at the most if they're reviewing somebody's individual tax return. And if they don't see that, they would then throw that receipt out, and that individual would incur a tax liability on something that they otherwise thought would be tax deductible. And so now you're going to have somebody that's very upset at you because they are now paying the tax on that deduction plus penalties and interest. So it's well to your benefit to have that phrase, no goods or services, unless you're in a quid pro quo situation, in which case you want to go down that rubric. And then dates. And it's good to have the date that the donation of the receipt and the date of the gift. That makes it easier to track for tax purposes. And just to be clear, some might ask this time of year, well, how soon do we have to have donation receipts issued by? Well, there's not necessarily a set statutory time frame that you have to issue those items by, but a donor does have to have that receipt in their hand by the earlier of the due date of their taxes or when they file. So if someone wants to file in January, they need to have that receipt in their hand if they're going to claim that as a deduction at the latest by April 15. Now, that's one of those things where you really want to help yourself out, and so you don't have people that are mad at you if something was disqualified as a charitable contribution. It's no exact responsibility that you have to issue that receipt by a set time frame on you as a church, but it's the responsibility of the donor. So you want to help the donor out in that area.